Good afternoon, everyone. This is John Campbell visiting you on Miracle Hour on bbsradio.com. And a very, very warm welcome to all our listeners all over the world to this one-hour program where we get to talk to some amazing people who are creating miracles in our world. And, wow, it's a beautiful day here in British Columbia. The sun is shining, the sky is blue, and it's kind of warm temperature. And I am so excited today to have a guest on my show who I met probably about a year ago now for the first time. And I always think it's interesting, once we've woken up, I get into so many different scenarios and meet so many different people, and every now and again somebody kind of really stands out and resonates with what you believe in and your passion, and you get talking, and it's like they don't need to explain anything, you know who they are and what they stand for, and there's an instant rapport. And both Mary, my wife, and I had this experience with this guest today, and her name is Ellen Hayakawa, and she's on beautiful Bowen Island off the west coast of Vancouver, where Mary and I stayed for some time and met some amazing people, and it's still a place very close to our hearts. And I'd just like to give a warm welcome now. Ellen, are you there?
I am, John. Thank you very much.
That's beautiful, and I can hear you beautifully clear. And how's the weather today over on Bowen?
Oh, it's sunny and warm and beautiful.
Oh,
and later on this afternoon, I'm going to go to the beach because it seems like we're having a wonderful extension of our summer, which seemed to be relatively short because it was a bit gray and rainy here this summer.
Yeah, and so you're going to the beach on Bowen?
I am.
Oh, how beautiful. Well, we have fond memories of kayaking down there.
Oh, great.
On the kayaking days, and it's really great, and thank you, first of all, Ellen, for giving up your time to come and share yourself and share your story and your passion and your vision with our listeners. And I guess it was probably a year ago we met, somewhere around that, maybe a little over a year?
I think so, yeah.
It was while we were at Xenia, staying with Angeline and friends, and it's almost like, you had a wonderful connection with Mary, and it's almost like I feel she ought to be talking to you today, but she's probably listening in somewhere. She's out at a meeting. But can you just tell our listeners, Ellen, a little bit about your background, where you came from? And I always like to do that. It gives people a flavor of who you are and what brought you to where you are today,
Sure, I'd be delighted to do that, John. Well, I started my career out as a scientist and as a wildlife biologist with the Canadian Wildlife Service in the federal government of Canada. And in 1994, on the night of my 35th birthday, I was called by Spirit, by God, in a dream to basically bring consciousness and awareness to spirituality in the workplace. And that was really my awakening, I think, as an adult, moved me into a far greater consciousness. And I would say, because consciousness is always evolving, we're always becoming more conscious and more aware. And I started to see synchronicity and magic and miracles in my life. I went from being a scientist in the government to and actually doing the work on spirituality in the workplace in the federal government with executives, and looking at the links between spirituality in the workplace and sustainability. And have since done and moved out of the government shortly after that, probably in 1995, because I realized that the work was far bigger than just one organization, and had done quite a lot of work in terms of implementing and raising awareness on spirituality in the workplace. I was in the Department of the Environment and did workshops with all of the senior managers there, as well as in the organization that basically trains all senior civil servants, and did some talks and workshops at that particular organization. So I felt as a seed planter that the seeds were well planted there, and went on to consult with executives and leaders and facilitate workshops on inspired leadership and spirituality in the workplace for about the last decade in various corporations, organizations, municipal government, et cetera, et cetera. And then and then I was called to do a Global Peace Summit in 2001 called the 2001 Summit on Spirituality and Sustainability. And so spent some time organizing that, and that happened just after, it's interesting that we're talking today, September the 11th.
Yeah, that hit me this morning, Ellen.
Yeah, and September 11th, 2001, which is the date that we will all remember. I'm sure we remember for the rest of our lives when we were told about what was going on in New York. And much like any pivotal moment in the destiny of humankind, our Global Peace Summit was scheduled from September 15th to the 22nd, 2001. And I had been told earlier in the year by my astrologer that if a group of people held, that there would be violence, great violence in the world that year, in fact in September, and that if a group of people held a space for global peace, that global peace would happen. And so I know there were events in New York City, peace events in that week. And as well, we had the Global Peace Summit in Vancouver, and over 4,000 people attended that particular event. And I guess shortly before that, I saw a film by Drumvalo Melchizedek about a young Mexican woman who could basically read photos, and in the film they talked about her reading photos through her skin, but that isn't actually the mechanism. It's not really the mechanism. It's not the way that it's really done. But anyway, that film had an impression upon me, and I decided to show that film to a group of friends, and there happened to be a 9-year-old boy who was there while we were watching the film. And we decided to try the exercise that she was doing in the film, which was being blindfolded and identifying books or photos and also pictures from magazines. And to our great astonishment, although the woman in the film had done exactly the same thing, this 9-year-old boy was able to basically read the photos blindfolded. So I started testing just down to what detail he could read, and then other groups of children after that, and found out that many children can read books and magazines and newspapers without using their outer sort of physical eyes, the eyes that we would normally identify with reading. And when I started asking them questions, as a scientist, I'm always interested in how does this happen? Why does it happen? And all the questions that scientists are used to asking. So I started asking the children individually, how do you read books and magazines and newspapers without your eyes? And consistently, one of the first little girls with whom I worked said, I focus on it with my third eye and I read the screens inside my head.
Wow, she said that straight out.
Yeah, she said that straight out. And again, of course, her parents were there and I was there, and much to the astonishment of her parents, and, who didn't know that she, A, could do this, and B, that she would be able to identify the how, the mechanism. And so I then started conducting workshops for families, and children and grandchildren and grandparents and parents would come to workshops. And I developed some exercises and adopted that exercise from the film, and found out that most of the children, we all have different psychic, intuitive, and healing gifts.
Yeah.
And many of the children could read books and magazines and newspapers without the use of their physical eyes.
Yeah.
And they would all say something to the effect like, I read the screens inside my head, or there is a screen inside my head. Or I asked one little 6-year-old, and I said, how do you read books and magazines and newspapers without your eyes? And he said, you read it. And I said, how do you read it? And he said, you read it with your eye. And I said, what eye? And he pointed to the middle of my forehead, and he said, that eye. And what was interesting to me was that it was obvious to him that my third eye was fully visible.
Yeah.
And so I've continued working in this area because, so many children are being diagnosed, and I'll say that again, that one of the interesting things was that many children who would come to workshops would have been identified in their schools as being, either unusually creative, have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD or ADD, sometimes obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, have been depressed. I've had children come who have been on antidepressants. Children who have dyslexia, autism, Asperger's, many,
or at least have been labeled with these things. Yeah.
Yes, they've been labeled with all of these kinds of things, and many, which was interesting, who could read books and newspapers and magazines without their eyes and couldn't read to their grade level in school.
Mm-hmm.
And yet had these and I won't call them even extraordinary abilities, because I believe that we all have them. Sometimes we've just forgotten them, or we haven't exercised them in a long time.
Or we've had them shut down by people who didn't understand.
Oh, that's right. And so that's been my interest in raising the awareness, because it seems to me that for the most part, whether in families, whether in the education system, in the health system, these children, we're focusing so much on trying to make children fit into a so-called order, which, and then we say they have a disorder if they actually don't fit in. And yet there's a whole spectrum, a whole dimension of other gifts that have to do with spirit and energy, and their sensitivity to spirit and energy that we just haven't even begun to explore or ask the questions about. And whether that's medically, educationally, scientifically, from a family, from a community base, we haven't made the observations. We haven't just been aware enough or interested enough to actually explore these questions, and beyond that, actually explore the questions with the children and the youth.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. It's amazing how you came about that and came upon it, and then just ran with it, because as you know, that is also my passion. Having been introduced to an education approach which totally supports and validates this type of thing, because the teachers within the approach are actually trained to deeply listen to the child, and to follow the child's instincts, what they want to do, when they want to do it. And it's really interesting what you said about the young, I think it was a young boy, was it, that wasn't able to read up to grade level at school, yet was using his third eye to read, magazines, etc., etc.
Yes.
And in this school, there's absolutely no pressure put on to force children to learn to read and write by a certain age, or do anything by a certain age. I mean, the whole concept to me, is just so obviously misplaced. And I think that one of the things that the wonderful work you're doing is disseminating this information. And I'm always keen to reiterate, it's not in a blaming manner, but we do need to educate and re-educate those who have got responsibility for children, parents, teachers, grandparents, family members, that these are new levels of consciousness of child coming into the world. It's not just it's not an imaginary thing. It's really happening, and it's really important that people hear that, because what tends to happen, I've found, is that if they're not validated by somebody in it, and it doesn't even matter if it's not a family member or a teacher, as long as there's one person who sees that child, who knows who they really are and understands where they're coming from and understands these gifts, that's what's important, because then they get an experience locked in their cells that they're okay and there's nothing wrong with them.
Absolutely. I would totally affirm that, John, that
Thank you.
Children, and it's the case, actually, we all need to be validated. We all need to be seen. And many children who are struggling with, for example, depression, part of it, in my experience, as I coach children and their families, is that the children haven't necessarily been seen or found, and it's just all they need is one person to basically affirm or validate. So, I can recall one child who came and had a session, and one of the things that his mother said was that after he had his coaching session, he went home and he slept for 14 hours. And she said to me, it was as though his soul relaxed, because he had found one adult who basically validated who he was.
That's it.
And he had been through, he's been through a sort of Western medical model, and I think that, that model was developed for a certain purpose, but it doesn't, and it will serve some people, it may not serve others. And part of the problem right now is, and I'm talking about all societal systems, is when we don't acknowledge there are other dimensions and other realities, which there basically are in the universe, then we have no other choice but then diagnose children as having, schizophrenia, or they're just imagining and seeing things, or whatever it is. And the fact is that, and that may be true in some cases, but also because of the children I work with and what we do when we explore their psychic and intuitive gifts and their multidimensional ways of knowing, is that these children are tuning into other dimensions and other realities and energies that are present. And they're just basically sensitive to those energies, which, from a scientific perspective, has to do with their brainwave states and the states of awareness that they are in and that can be achieved. And really, I think that part, and I'm really excited by the fact that there's so much going on right now in terms of neurophysiology, brain, chemistry, and just sort of the scientific understanding. We've got, scanning MRIs and PT and all the kinds of information that, and we certainly don't need that information, but it is helping us to understand what spiritual awareness and psychic awareness actually looks like. And I think that work is really exciting, and we're going to see, and what's happening right now is bringing together both, the wonderful scientific methodologies and technologies that we have, together with how that actually, in many ways, validates, what's going on from a spiritual perspective.
Spiritual, yeah.
So it's providing, it's just some of that scientific evidence, which we haven't actually been able to say before unequivocally, but we know that, that there are certain stages, when children are born, that they're basically in delta and theta state, and that we achieve these states. Normally, people achieve, delta state only in their sleep, and yet there are there are people on the planet who, for example, Dadi Janki, who's the head of the Brahma Kumaris, and when she was measured at the University of Austin, Texas, I think it was in the 70s. Her brain was constantly in the delta state, and they said that she had the most peaceful, stable mind in the world. And so, what's exciting to me, and so therefore, from an inspirational point of view, there are people who are walking role models of inner peace, and then how that inner peace reflects on the outside. I mean, the delta brainwave state is also that place where miracles are performed, incredible insights, et cetera, et cetera. And, we know things about the theta state, or the state of creative genius. And these are all connected to these abilities that, and it's more frequent, it just seems to be more evident now because we've got a whole generations of children who are being born who, basically this is just sort of every day to them. And yet we know even in the process of child development that there are certain stages where, certain kinds of learning is best. There are certain stages where it's best to learn how to read. And I think if we did have a combination of some of the science and we, could individualize programs for children, we'd be, in a far better state.
Absolutely, but I think for me it's about why I love this approach to education, which we found in India, the KPM approach, is that they are so steeped. The adults involved are so steeped in the innate knowing of the child when they're ready to do anything.
Right.
And I think that's the part which I see as being the part to try and encourage adults. We're so conditioned, aren't we, with years of conditioning about wanting to control things to fit into set paradigms, societal demands, etc., etc., etc. Yet within every one of us, we've got this higher being that knows, absolutely knows, that no one else has the right to discount or to say, no, that's you've got to do that now or whatever. Would you agree with that, Alan?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that that's true, that, from the first principles, we've all been created in spirit, if you believe in God by spirit, or whatever your particular spiritual path that you're on, which, I say that we honor every person's spiritual path. And within that, the human spirit does know, each soul knows what he or she came here to do.
Yeah.
What each being, and whether you're a bird or a person.
Yeah.
You were designed for a particular ecological niche in some way. Each of us is part of the fabric of the divine, and we all have a piece which, when we fully manifest our gifts and talents and continue to expand and open to our potential and manifest that potential, we all have a piece of the divine fabric, and we're independent and interdependent.
That's it.
And so, we have our individual path, but certainly, that is all, of course, linked in the unified field of reality.
Yeah.
And people, each person does know when it's their time. And I think that that's also very evident with children, that if they can be encouraged to follow their passion and their interests and their gifts through following that passion and interests and gifts, and really being encouraged to let, and it's our hearts, their hearts, to be led by the heart rather than by the mind, and use the mind as a tool.
To process what the heart is telling them.
Yeah, and we're very organic.
Exactly.
That's how we're created. We're created out of organic material. So,
absolutely.
The way that we unfold that energy and how it's manifested in the material physical plane looks very different, and it all fits.
Yeah, yeah.
So children know, when.
Oh, yeah, and of course, it's their feeling mechanism. It's their feeling mechanism, which is the guidebook, if you like.
Yeah.
And the difficulty, when it's untainted, when we come in, and the problem I find is that very quickly, children get messages like, "No, you don't feel that. You don't want to do that. You do want to do this. You don't." Even when they're saying, "I don't want to do that," they're getting somebody to tell them, "Yes, you do want to do that." And when they say, I do want to do that," say, "No, you don't want to do that." In the end, what happens is that, I think, gets a new neural pathway gets cut in their brain, that they actually deny what they know is best for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And if you take that on, the consequences can be absolutely staggeringly damaging.
Yes.
Because it leads to not trusting their actual feelings. Eventually, if it gets so bad, they don't even know what they feel, and there's so many things like substances and work even that blot out the feelings themselves. But they get to a stage where they start making choices in their lives, and they don't honor what their intuition is telling them, because they've been so programmed not to honor their intuition. So when it gets out into the big world, like the choices of work, of partners, anything like that, and that's when I think that's why we have so many problems in that area of society. The abuse that goes on, etc., is so often caused because that has become a pattern and is almost sought out, if you like, in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's crucial that this work is made public and that there is more awareness brought into the education generally. Because how do you see this going, Ellen, in the traditional way? I mean, I know there's some amazing educational approaches, and when we were on Bowen, Mary and I, we got to meet I forget the guy's name now, from the education movement that came over with the kids. Is it Brent Sadler? No.
Oh, yes, Brent. Yes,
Brent
Cameron.
from the Wonder Tree?
Yep, Brent Cameron.
Brent Cameron, that's right. I mean, amazing stuff, just mind-blowing. And there's a lot of them. I really want to validate that. But have you been able to make any inroads in traditional education establishments?
I haven't yet worked, for example, in a public school, although I'm looking forward to the day when that happens, because I think that that's very important, because no matter what, most children are in attendance at within the public school system.
Yeah.
And we know the struggles that teachers are having.
Yeah.
However, one of the things that is very encouraging to me is that, for example, I was talking with a professor of psychology at the University of British Columbia, and she said she was asked to speak to children or to teachers, teachers who are training, so teachers who are in teachers' college, about the gifts of the children. And she has also invited me to give a talk at the University of British Columbia to teachers about the work, because I've worked directly with the children. So I think that that's encouraging, because if we start to have a group of teachers who are expanding their consciousness and their knowledge about children and about the gifts that children bring, that's also going to help in terms of what the actual education system looks like.
Yeah, yeah.
So we have to, it's the whole process of redesigning, which is always the case. In society we have certain structures, and we put structures in for communities of people, for groups of people, we have societal structures for governments and for the way healthcare systems run and all kinds of other things.
Yeah.
And, I'm not a strong proponent of disassembling everything and throwing out the baby with the bathwater, because there's always some part that's working very well. And I do think that it's a matter of redesigning the system, and that's constant, because as consciousness evolves, the system constantly needs to be redesigned, and it is redesigned with the consciousness of the people who are making the decisions every day.
Yeah.
In terms of what the system needs to look like.
Yeah.
So if all of those people, together with parents and children, are able to make those decisions from that place of heart and intuition, we're going to have far better outcomes than we presently have.
Yeah.
So I find
thank you for reminding us about that, because I realize that is a very, very true thing, and I certainly also am not an advocate of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, And the other thing I think is important for me to remember anyway as well, that it's all happening in divine timing.
It is.
And sometimes I can forget that as well, And,
yeah, and I think it is important to remember that everybody on the planet, just by definition, consciousness and awareness is being raised. And so, no matter whether we like it or not, new energies are coming in. And we can choose whether we integrate them or not.
Yeah.
But the fact is that everything is accelerating,
Yeah.
And so...
And we actually don't have to do anything. That's the reality, isn't it?
That's right.
We don't have to do it.
It's really a matter of responding to the divine guidance and energy and messages that come to each person, through whichever... And that includes children, the children are doing their role. Children who don't necessarily fit into the system, they're playing their role and saying, well, this system doesn't work for me. And as a result, I know at one point, I think we had 5 different systems of education on Bowen Island. Now, we're a small island of 3,000 people. And we have sort of maybe an exceptional circumstance. I think we have the greatest number of families, per square kilometer in all of British Columbia.
Is that right?
Yeah, and it's a very, very family-oriented place. And people come here who are interested in children and families and education. And, of course, the island has its own energies. And its destiny is to do this work with children, which goes along together with the work of international peace. So as an international spiritual pilgrimage site that's fulfilling its destiny, I think a part of that, which we can see in a physical way, in a material way, is this interest in very different ways of children being educated with varying levels of both parental and community participation, so that there's much more encouragement of each child developing his or her unique gifts and having them being brought to the world. So I do think that we're going to see, and we do see it anyway, it's just more and more different kinds of education. And hopefully, with that diversity to choose from, each child and their parents will be able to choose the one that's most aligned with that child and with the family, because, that way everybody's going to get the most out of it.
Yeah. I think that, it's true. And I guess the part that is sometimes difficult is when you see children who are so obviously, well, to us anyway, so obviously gifted and operating from another level, in an environment where that's totally not validated or understood or whatever. And what I think happens is that's when we get all this low-grade depression coming in. I think that has a lot to do with it as well, because they're shut down. They're not their desires and their way of seeing the world is not validated, and then they just turn it inwards. And I think there's a lot of low-grade depression running around, which maybe not even normally diagnosed as depression, but it's so evident.
Yeah, you're right, John. And I think that sort of the rule of thumb is that, and I've seen it with many children with whom I've worked, that if they're in an environment, and it also means being surrounded by people who are on the same wavelength. So this is actually all kind of scientific as well, and it's just really, I think, the way that it works. When you're with people who are on the same wavelength, for children, and again, it's not just children; it's everybody. When you're with people on the same wavelength, you blossom.
Yep.
You open up.
Yeah.
You can open to another level. When you're with people and in an environment where that's not of your wavelength, with which you do not resonate, then we tend to contract.
That's it.
We tend to shut down. And so, again, it really isn't any different with the children. In fact, it does seem to be amplified. My observation is it really seems to be amplified. And then they have certain behaviors, and they're depressed, and, all kinds of other things. So it behooves us to be as stewards, as adult stewards or youth stewards for children. We need to be looking out for what kind of environment and with whom do they actually blossom and brighten and, want to share with. And I think there's something about learning to get along with all people in the world and the most people that we can. But in terms of that sort of learning environment and how we're nurtured and supported, that's a real key. And so hopefully, the circle, so the children who, are on the same wavelength and the adults who are on that wavelength and who can support them. And because these children have great things to teach us, many of the things that they can do, I can't. I might be able to
but that's so wonderful, Ellen, that you can say that, and, when I've spoken to teachers and parents as well, I've really emphasized the point. I said, hey, it's okay for your kid to know more than you do.
Right.
It's really okay. If they do, you can say to them, hey, could you show me how you do that? Can you just put that across me one more time? And, I've done it with my kids, and they love it.
Yes.
They love it. But you see, it's always the fears of the adults. Oh, if I do that, then I'm going to be looking like I don't know all the answers, which is great. That's the greatest gift you can give your kid.
Right.
It's such fun, when you can play with this. If people, what I find is, I honestly believe everyone's doing the best they can with the tools they've got.
Yes.
But the tragedy is there are some with such poor tools, that there's really, it's a real struggle. And kids, and I love the thing where you talk about wavelengths, because that's all it is, really. We're talking about, we all know when, we're in the same vibration and we're buzzing and that sort of thing. But sometimes, with kids, because they're generally under the watchful eye, control in many cases of adults, they have no option in certain areas, and they're the ones who I think need real support from outside.
Mm-hmm. And it's every child, every person responds, I will say, to the same things, which are, and being that we're human, we have such a range of emotions, but we all respond to beauty. We all respond to love.
Yeah.
And love itself can take very many different forms, I was saying to somebody, because, again, with children, sometimes they feel like doing certain things, and yet it isn't necessarily appropriate. There's a discernment, and there's many, many levels of just thinking, firstly, because sometimes I find children are basically quite, self-centered and selfish in a negative way. And part of their learning and part of what I think we need to do in terms of stewardship as adults is to help them to learn that the bigger way to think, which Native Americans, have brought, is it's not only thinking about what you want to do and, it's thinking about what you want to do and what you want to do and the implications of your actions on every other person in the group and for 7 generations.
That's it, yeah.
And so there's something in terms of learning, there's still the combination to me of discipline, of ethics, of integrity, of other kinds of things that sometimes children have that. We're all born with different awarenesses.
Levels of gifts, yeah.
And beliefs and all those kinds of things. And sometimes a child needs to be taught those things.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree with that. They do. And what my experience has been is that the way you teach them that is you model it. You be it.
Yeah.
They ain't going to get it by parents that tell them that and then behave in a different way.
Yes.
So, it's wonderful because in the KPM, one of the things that they taught the teachers in the teacher training is about children sharing. And it was fascinating because they said at a certain age, a child doesn't understand. It is totally, it's totally inappropriate to force a young child to share what they have with another child.
Mm-hmm.
And of course that really rocks people who've come from maybe our kind of, background. But having witnessed it and witnessed how they handle it, I absolutely understand it. And they said no, because that child hasn't developmentally understood, hasn't got that stage yet. So what they do, they divert the other child and they get something else for it. They said, but the way you get him to share is you start sharing. You share your home with friends. You share your thing. And that's how they start getting the experience that it's safe, because what they found is, and they've done the research, is that these kids that have been forced to share at a young age, you've got to share that, they end up being so attached and grow up with a fear that everything's going to be taken away from them. So they become selfish. So it's actually the opposite is achieved.
Yes. Yeah.
Isn't it fascinating?
Yeah. There's so many levels of it. And, ultimately it's about being sensitive to the energy. Yeah. Really.
Yeah.
In many ways.
And what are your immediate plans now, Ellen? For that, have you got any conferences you're talking at, or what are your plans for the?
Yes, well, one of the exciting things that is upcoming is we're organizing here in Vancouver, and I have an international steering committee. There's Dr. Mohini Giri from India. She was a Nobel Peace Prize nominee in 2005. And Dr. Tobin Hart, who wrote The Secret Spiritual World of Children, is on the steering committee. Marianne Williamson has added her voice to the steering committee. We're organizing the 2008 Children and Youth Summit on Spirituality and Sustainability, where at least 50% of the presentations will be given by children and youth sharing their spiritual wisdom, including psychic, intuitive, and healing abilities.
Wonderful.
So we have there's a website. It's up. It's www.2008summit.net. And for example, one little girl, actually the young girl, she was 7, who said, I focus, when she read the books and magazines, she said, I focus on it with my third eye, and I read the screens inside my head. She's now 14, and she's developed a healing technique called dark wave technology, which is based on quantum physics, and she's taught it to a workshop of adults living with cancer, and one man was healed of terminal cancer. She's going to be teaching that workshop at the summit. And so very much about children and youth and if there's infants or unborn children who also want to communicate, we're open to, whatever is going to happen. We've got a group of children or a group of youth at their ages 14 to 18 coming from The Hague. And what they said is that every child has a voice, every child has something to say, and what they would like to do is hold the space for younger children to be able to have a voice and to voice whatever that they want to say. There's a group of children coming from Austin, Texas, and they're basically going to webcast the event.
Oh, how wonderful.
So it's an event about, child and youth empowerment, leadership, teaching, and we're looking if any of your listeners know children who would have enough material. We're looking for children and youth who can make a compelling presentation, love to present, and can make a compelling, riveting presentation that would hold the attention of children and youth. Oh, yes, we've got one, I think, on quantum physics, and apparently it was given in a public school. It was so highly entertaining and humorous that the teacher said it was actually far too entertaining. Everybody was laughing too much.
Yeah, it was having far too much fun to be doing you any good.
So right now we're inviting children and youth, who have something to present, who have proposals to do that and or to be supported, by their parents or by other people. And the adults really will be there to listen, to be in support of the youth. And if there are some slots left over, then, we'll schedule those later on for people who are in support of children and youth.
Yeah.
But right now our priority is really about empowering the children and youth.
That's wonderful. And where is that going to be held, Ellen?
Well, that'll be here in Vancouver. And people can't forget the date because it's 080808.
Oh, great.
0808 is...
I'm writing it down now.
Right. That's the Friday. And you can...
And what's the venue?
Well, we're not... We're just working out the details of the venue right now, but that information will be posted on the website, as we know.
Yeah. And are you going to be, it'll be a pretty large venue, I guess, huh? So it'll hold a few people.
Yeah, absolutely. I have done other things, like I was in Dharamsala in India, visiting with His Holiness' sister, Jetsun Pimala, who runs the Tibetan Children's Village.
Uh-huh.
And that was last year, and she said she would bring children from the Tibetan Children's Village.
Wow.
So we're also looking for sponsors for children and their mentors from India and Africa. But what a lot of groups are doing in various places, and I just had a teacher from New York City contact me, is that they're helping, the adults are holding the space so that children and youth can do fundraising so that they can come to the summit. And with some groups there, as part of their fundraising, they're going to support somebody to come from another country who might not necessarily be able to afford it.
That's wonderful.
And it's not just a one-off summit. So in this first year, what we're doing is helping children and youth and parents and educators to basically meet each other.
Yeah.
And to start the development of a global community. So I'm thinking there will be summits. We don't know that for sure, but maybe every 2 years.
Right.
We definitely know there will be another one in 2012 as an extremely important date in the cosmic calendar. But it's really just the start of our work, and eventually we'll be supporting all the children and youth to basically take over the summit so that
they run it.
So that they run it.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
So that they're different, whatever their projects are, that they get support from other children and youth. And, of course, we can do that. People can keep in touch via the Internet.
That's
and
wonderful.
We'll soon have our sort of community chat room up. And the other place you can get more information on the work is on my website, which is www.ellenhayakawa.com. So it's ELLENHAYAKAWA.com. And there's information and articles about some of the work that I've been doing with the children.
That's wonderful. And just for the information of our listeners, that if any of you didn't get that down, if you just go to the info page, Ellen's on the radio station page on Miracle Hour, Ellen's bio is up there, and that's there.
The other thing that I'd like to say to your listeners is that there's another conference that's coming up in Chattanooga, Tennessee, November 8th to the 11th, and it's run by the Child Spirit Institute, and it's the third North American Conference on Children's Spirituality, and you can get more information about that at childspirit.org.
Childspirit, all one word, .org.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And it's amazing what's my juices flow, whenever I hear you talk about this and about the wonderful concept that the kids are going to end up organizing the whole of the conference, because that's another thing that happens in the KPM school, The kids put on these amazing graduation day concerts that happens every year on graduation day. And the kind of help and assistance from the teachers is minimal. It's all done by them. The teachers are always there, ready and available, but they find that these kids, because they've grown up with this, this validation from a young age, they've got everything. They can put on amazing stuff, and even in the area of earning a living, kids now are, they're developing skills, especially with the internet. I had to laugh the other day. I read a piece by, Warren Buffett. You may have heard of Warren Buffett.
Yes.
He's apparently the second richest guy in the world, second to Bill Gates. And he made a comment. He said he did his first business venture, I think he said when he was 13, and his only regret was that he hadn't started earlier.
Right.
And, it's not about, some people say, oh, you shouldn't be, exposing children to money and all that. It's not about that. It's about exposing them to their passion. And if their passion happens to be that it earns money, so what?
Yes, absolutely. And in that, I'm working with a group of people on a foundation that will help children and youth to launch their projects of Spirit of the Light, because that's basically just to help to support them to do that.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And it's funny because these gifted children, they're in every area now. These gifts are coming out in every area. And an interesting thing that in the sporting world, I think you maybe know that one of my passions is football, or soccer as they call it in the North American continent. And there's a young kid of 9 years of age who's just been found in Brisbane, Australia, where Mary's from. He's actually British by birth, but his parents went over at a young age. And this guy has got a talent with a soccer ball, which I can only say is sublime, and it's surreal to watch him play, So these kids with these extremely honed talents are popping up in all different areas of life.
Absolutely. It's very exciting.
Yeah.
And, ultimately and because many of the children are here, as we all manifest our gifts and talents, we actually move towards global peace.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very exciting thing, because when you have inner peace, when you can maintain certain brainwave states, and you're in the state of peace, it emanates to the outer world. And as we all connect, that is how the inner peace will manifest on the outside, because we won't be able to be violent any longer.
That's it. We won't even be in our consciousness. That is true, and that's that old adage, be the change you want to see in the world. And this program is called Miracle Hour, and I talked to you a little bit earlier about the Course in Miracles, which I have found a great help. And it's interesting how that has been disseminated as well since it first came out. And so many of the principles that I understand in the Course today are what you're talking about, are actually what these children are teaching now,
Yes. It's a very exciting time, and it's the time for us to sit in circles together. So, great-grandparents and grandparents and parents and children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and really a wonderful time of exchange and interchange. And, it's not about the new versus the old. It's really...
Not at all.
about the integrating of the ancient wisdom, and in fact, this is all ancient wisdom.
Yeah.
But having it be revived and regenerated and spread, on this planet.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Ellen, this has been such a beautiful. It's absolutely. We're up for time, and I can't believe how fast this has gone. It's what they say. Time flies when you're having fun.
That's right. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. Just like sitting across the room from you there. I thank you once again for all what you're doing in the world for these children, because it is so important. It's wonderful work, and I want to salute your courage and your love and your compassion and everything about your being. You're an incredible woman, and it was a real gift when Mary and I first met you, and I look forward to keeping in contact and hearing more about what you're doing. And thank you once again for coming on the show today.
Well, thank you, John, for having me on your show, and I would say the same to you. It's just wonderful, the work that you're doing to raise consciousness on this planet, and the work you're doing with children as well. Each of us has a piece of the whole pie, and so it's wonderful to dance together, for everybody to put their pieces in and dance together.
Thank you, Ellen. And have a wonderful day, and give our love to everyone there on the island, won't you? We'll be back soon.
Thank you. I will.
Okay. God bless you.
Okay. God bless you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.